Right, the power of the gavel. Firstly, can I please welcome everyone to this meeting of the Health and Environment Policy Committee, taking place from the Walton Suite in Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:32. My name is Councillor Steve Cremoyson. I'm chairperson of this meeting. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. Now, could I just ask everyone to please ensure their mobile phones are on silent. In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. And can I welcome members of the public and visiting councillors to the meeting. I will invite you forward when it is time for you to make your contribution. So let's now turn to the agenda. So first off, we'll start with apologies.
Thank you, Chair. No apologies for absence have been received. All members are present. Thank you.
Sorry?
All members are present. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could go through the routine declarations of interest. Thank you, Councillor Warwick.
Thank you, Councillor Cremoyson. Just as I need to declare that I'm a member of Hampshire County Council and executive member for adult social care, but I don't think there is any conflict at this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Warwick. So I'll just make a couple of announcements. We've got a fairly busy agenda, so we'll keep it as short as I can. This is really to give a heads up to members who probably had an email notification, but also anyone else in the room who might be interested, that we have two extraordinary HEP dates. By extraordinary, I mean extra, not necessarily particularly stunning, although they might turn out that way. The first one is on Monday, January the 22nd, which will be, the main topic will be waste and recycling in the light of recent decisions from the government and the county council, and our own work on surveying the district to understand how people might prefer to see the waste and recycling rolled out. And the second extraordinary HEP meeting will be on Wednesday, the 31st of January, and that will be to discuss the NHS Trust's plans for hospital services in Basingstoke and Winchester. And I'm sure everyone around the room has probably heard stuff in the press and through other sources that indicate this is quite a significant investment that's being proposed, and it will inevitably have some changes, and no doubt those will be amplified to create some fears, some of which might be well justified, and many of which probably are not well justified. So we're having an extraordinary HEP meeting to understand better what the NHS Trust plans are in that regard. So that will be on January the 31st of Wednesday, January the 31st. Thank you. If we can now move on to minutes, I'm going to look around the room at members and ask if the minutes are an accurate record of the previous meeting in September. You could just, yeah, all nodding. So I think we'll take that as agreed. Right, let's now move on to the public participation slot. Although what I will do is we check that we've got Tim Jackson here. Tim, I think you're going to speak later, just before the item on the CNAP Carbon Neutral Action Plan report, which is item 8. So I will call you forward when it's your time to speak. And similarly, councillors, Councillor Power and Councillor Wallace and Councillor Lee, I will call you forward at the right points in the agenda. Right, let's move on to item 6. Item 6 is on the subject of water quality, and we've had speakers at various HEP, at the July HEP, and also in a March meeting from various agencies, including Southern Water, and I think we had the Environment Agency in March. Tonight we've got Sienna Summers from the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, who we've asked to come and talk to us about the water quality in our rivers in the Winchester district specifically, but if you stray outside of that, don't worry. I'm sure it's probably representative of what's going on in our rivers. So if you'd like to step up to the public participation spot, and I think I can hand it over to you. And you need to press one of the buttons to take over control of the mics. And if you'd like to take it away, and then we'll ask questions. Thank you.
Great, I've pressed the button. That's working. Sound hear myself. Thank you all for having me here today. It's great to see that councils such as yourselves are trying to take a leading role in tackling water pollution and water quality issues, and the wider river environment as well. I'll start briefly. I'll touch on kind of the state of the River Itchen in particular, and kind of chalk streams. And then I'll bring it to a little bit about what we're doing as a trust, and then a few things which I would urge you guys to do as well. So obviously you have in your district one of the iconic, beautiful chalk streams, the River Itchen. And
sorry, Sienna, I've just realised I have done. I'm just sorry to interrupt you, but I realised I should have called Councillor Lee and Councillor Power to speak first.
I don't mind.
Well, I'm just wondering if you're going to raise issues that maybe Sienna might be able to answer. Okay, we'll do that. Okay. Sorry, Sienna.
It's
Carry
okay.
on.
I'm happy to come on and answer questions afterwards if needed. Obviously, you have what's known as the gold standard of chalk streams, the River Itchen. And you're fortunate this is protected as a SAC and triple SI, which is unusual because only 4 chalk streams in the country are protected to that level, with the remaining, some 12 of them have triple SI protection and the remaining with no protection at all. And this does mean that the Itchen is in better condition in some aspects than other chalk streams, and in particular, this protection has helped drive improvements in abstraction and some improvements, particularly in kind of phosphates and nitrates being stripped from wastewater treatment works. We see as a whole that rivers that are protected at an SAC level have a higher level of phosphate stripping. About 80% of the wastewater treatment works have phosphate stripping in SAC rivers, and that falls to about 50% in triple SI rivers, and then down again even lower in non-designated rivers. And what that means in practice is that the Environment Agency as a whole says that the Itchen water body is in good ecological status. But not everything is as it seems on the surface. If you dig a little bit deeper and look into the triple SI units, which are the kind of individual habitats that make up, I guess, the Itchen as a whole, it's not the same picture. So 55% of those are in unfavourable recovering condition, only 10% in favourable condition, 27% in unfavourable no change, and 5% in unfavourable declining. And really this is an indicator that the habitats themselves are not in the shape that it should be. They're not resilient to change, and particularly with climate change, chalk streams are extremely vulnerable because they're quite low flow systems. They're less able to kind of adapt as well. So we've got an idea about their state, but actually we need more information, and that's something that we're working on, but also lots of other people in the test and the Itchen. So there is the Wessex River Trust, who are doing a lot of river fly monitoring. Our Watercress and Winterbourne scheme are doing a lot of citizen science monitoring and through the Riverfly programme, and we're just at the stage where we can make long-term assessments about and trends about things from phosphates and nitrates to abstraction and other things. We've only just got the data for kind of the 3rd or 4th year, which means we can start to make those trends. We haven't formalized that into anything yet, but we're working on it. There's also other indicators about the state of the Itchen, such as salmon migration, which we've had a pretty catastrophic year last year after the severe drought led the Itchen to have from recent highs around 800 salmon migrating to only around 100 last year, which was one of the lowest in records since kind of the 90s. So it kind of gives you an overview of the state of the Itchen, and we have, particularly in Winchester, a really strong connection as a trust to the area. We have a lot of our reserves bordering the Itchen, such as Winnall Moors and Hockley Meadows, and we've been for quite a long time demonstrating the ability of our reserves and nature-based solutions as a whole to improve not just what's in our reserve, but the wider ecosystem and kind of catchment. So obviously we had the flooding in 2014, and our reserve was really key to kind of alleviating that. But this also has kind of impacts water quality. So we're seeing that our reserves are better able to capture sediment and nitrates and other things. So we're not directly monitoring this at the moment on Winnall, but we are on other reserves, and we're hoping to roll out some monitoring as well across most of our reserves to be able to kind of measure the impact of exactly the work that we're doing and how that translates into the wider catchment. We're also delivering nutrient neutrality kind of credits as well, and that is obviously a key issue in the catchment. Most of our schemes at the moment are on the Isle of Wight, but it's delivering for kind of the Solent as a whole. But we are looking to kind of expand that and our biodiversity net gain as well. So really looking at top tier, the gold standard of nutrient neutrality, making sure that we've got significant headroom to make sure that it's actually providing a net loss of nutrients in the system. And we'll be doing the same for biodiversity net gain as well. Moving on a little bit to our kind of community work, as I think a lot of you will know about our Watercress and Winterbournes programme. We have a community kind of organising approach where we support communities around the headwaters to restore the Test and Itchen and many other chalk streams as well. They do monitoring, but they also do campaigning, and they've done a lot of really important work holding Southern Water to account, and it's something that we're really keen to kind of try and roll out across a wider catchment as well. We also do a lot of influencing work with MPs and with councils, and working on getting better protections for chalk streams in Parliament. So working particularly with other wildlife trusts for non-designated chalk streams and better protections, but also making sure the chalk streams, the protections on all chalk streams like SAC chalk streams like the Itchen are fit for purpose. I'll move briefly on to the kind of opportunities really. I think there's a few opportunities for the council, and I think this motion is a really good first step, but we've got here. And actually it starts to make me think about what needs to happen is really more of a strategic approach to things like water quality in the river environment that generally is kind of tacked on to biodiversity and other strategies, but it really needs its own overarching approach like we have for the climate emergency or for biodiversity emergency. So I think this is a really useful first step, but actually I'd really like to see things like this formalised into a strategy and a plan. The next is really the link between this work and local planning, and you're obviously reviewing your local plan, and this is a really key time for making sure that policies in there are strong for chalk streams and for the Itchen. So I know we responded to your last planning consultation on this, but actually I think I would really urge you to learn from the Cabot Chalk Stream Restoration Strategy that came out a couple of years ago, which had recommendations in there for local planning authorities and in terms of, you know, what can we do to be the best of the best. And that's things including like buffers for chalk around chalk streams, around no development zones, making sure that there's there's existence of or pre-existence or parallel infrastructure for treatment works at the same time. SUDS, higher standards of water efficiency. And I know there's parts of this across some of your local plan already, but actually formalising this into a proper chalk stream policy would be brilliant, and leading in the area as well. Because I'm aware that your current policy, NE17, doesn't have much reference to chalk stream or chalk stream specific issues. I think also the key thing is supporting communities to take action. So it would be really useful to understand how you're planning to do that and how we can work together, but as well as lots of other partners like the Friends of the Itchen Navigation, Test and Itchen Association, Wessex Rivers Trust, to make sure that we really have the most comprehensive evidence for chalk streams, but also that we're supporting those people also to hold Southern Water accountable or to take action in other ways as well. Finally, linked to planning actually is a small thing on biodiversity net gain and making sure that we're making the best use of biodiversity net gain to try and strategically direct that where possible. For instance, through the strategic significance score that we can kind of mandate through the local plans, but also looking into kind of whether you can deliver strategic sites for biodiversity net gain or nutrient neutrality in your district in areas that will benefit chalk streams. Is something that Eastleigh Borough Council have just done, is bought a big site for strategic mitigation, and they're delivering it. So you can control where biodiversity net gain goes and make sure it has maximum benefit for your local community. And actually that should really be guided by the local nature recovery strategies, which should be embedded in your local plan and help direct where some of these improvements could go.
Thank you, Sienna.
Do I need to press anything?
If you just press it to, yeah, then it doesn't cause feedback. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask one quick question, but I'm going to have to invite the councillors who come in to speak. I've done that in the right order, and I'd much rather that everyone, the members here, remember exactly what you've said and have questions lined up, so they don't get the questions that come up from the next two speakers that override that. So hopefully you all made that note of your questions and you're ready to go when so if you'd just like to stay there, Sienna. I'm going to ask firstly Councillor Lee, because I think you wanted to speak, didn't you? If you could come in and have your say.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak. It was a bit tricky to try and predict what Sienna was going to say, so I'm going to adjust quite quickly my questions. But I did want to thank the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Trust and the team for their brilliant work. I mean, what you do is phenomenal, and you know, it's absolutely essential given our nature crisis. As you've indicated, our rivers are struggling to meet the appropriate standards. Only 14% of our rivers meet good ecological status, and none are reaching good chemical status. Sewerage and urban pollution, agricultural pollution, industrial pollution all contribute to the problem, as we all know. And cleaning up this is going to be a real challenge. And it's heartening that we've got our declarations for the crises, climate and nature. But can I suggest that, and I think it's been alluded to by Sienna, that we shouldn't just tack on the element of pollution. I would say we've got a triple challenge, and that is, you know, climate, nature, and the pollution crises together. And an overarching approach perhaps needs to be stitched together in the way we think about this. So really, I think the question I was going to ask is, what more can Winchester City Council do? And you've answered it. Thanks. So thank you very much. My second question, given where my ward is, was to ask for comment on the state of the River Meon compared with what you call the gold standard, the River Itchen. I think there's some concern down the line, if I can put it that way, that the local communities need some reassurance that not all effort is being put into the gold standard Itchen and Test. So shall I just go through my questions or stop there and ask that question to be answered, or what do you prefer, Chair?
Well, how many questions have you
I've got about three more very quickly, if I may.
If you want to just identify the three questions, and hopefully
okay, and then
members around the table will take them on board and
Okay,
they can ask them as they see fit compared with their questions.
okay, I'll crack on then if that's all right. And then the other one you touched on was, the Wessex Trust and so on. So citizen scientists are very clearly very important to fill the breach in helping the trust. So I'd be grateful if you could perhaps just outline improve ways to recruit and train volunteers to be a force multiplier for action. Because I think that's very important. So, for example, in Central Mill Valley, we've got the Soberton Newtown Conservation Group. I don't think they're plugged in, and they could benefit from that sharing and support. So the question is, do you register these groups? And if we don't, should we be creating a register, maybe from a district perspective or maybe from the trust perspective, so that we can join these groups up, in terms of areas of interest and expertise to get the force multiplying action. And the other concern I have from where my ward is the non-compliance of off-grid sewage systems. And I just wondered whether we're doing enough, and really wants to ask, are there any new ideas on how we might generate greater action? And my final question really,
Councillor Lee, on which type of sewage systems?
off-grid sewage
Off-grid,
treatment plants. Yeah. And my final question really is perhaps to the committee is that, and you mentioned it, Chair, that we had a statutory authorities, water companies, giving us an update on the quality of our rivers and the issues of pollution and so on earlier this year. And frankly, it's gone very quiet. So I'm just wondering whether the committee might be minded to repeat that again and hold these statutory organisations and water companies to account, and perhaps this time include some of the wildlife trusts to partake in that. I think that'd be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I think the way we'll do this is we'll try and dovetail some of your questions into the questions that the members ask, as we need to obviously manage the time. And I know Councillor Power will want to speak, and we probably do want to get home tonight. So, so I'm going to invite Councillor Power to come up to the table, have a few words, and then we'll come back to Sienna. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I can bear witness that the Watercress and Winterbournes project is very successful of training volunteers. I think there's now about 50 of us involved in invertebrate sampling, and there have been a number of spin-off projects, especially with septic tanks and water treatment works, which have been absolutely riveting. Now, Chairman, I think you've covered most of your bases from the resolution as the HEP committee. It's a pity the Southern Water session was eclipsed by water supply problems, but I'm sure we can walk around that. But you do have an outstanding action to publish your conclusions. Now, given the emerging threats and opportunities there are on water quality at the moment, I wonder if perhaps an annual review would work better for this committee on actions taken, results achieved, which could then form a very small part of the council annual report, because I think that might work better for all parties if we can feed back, which could of course be combined but not subsumed by a report on biodiversity. So I'd expect to see the council's support for water recycling, because over abstraction is a big problem in the headwaters. I'd expect to see recommendations to promote successful interventions, and I hope that our work on the sewage treatment plants that we own is going to make a difference, and we can measure that difference. Possibly a commitment to publicise and celebrate the significant work being done in the parishes. Bishop Sutton has got very enthusiastic about their river suddenly, and they've got 3 spin-off projects, one on septic tanks, one on a community craft project, and they're also celebrating their wildlife with some cameras. I would like to add one list to your questions for Sienna regarding the state of the triple SIs in the headwaters of the Itchen. When I last checked the status on Magic Map, the DEFRA Magic Map, the last time they were assessed was something like 2012. I have seen a degradation in the abundance and diversity of wildlife on my river. since 2012, and I have not seen a kingfisher for 12 years, except a dead one that had been run over. So I just think we need to be very aware that the EA are not checking as often as we would wish them to do. And would you like me to mention the oil spill in Cheriton, which had an impact? I think we might as well acknowledge that, because there is a serious impact there. Would you like me to run over, Chairman, the emerging threats, or would you rather wait until you get to talk to Sienna yourselves?
If you'd like to pose the question,
I would.
we'll see if we can pick it up, but we will have to prioritise. Other members may have other questions, and we will have to.
I will add them to your list if I may. It's just threats and opportunities, really. So we had a very good talk on private sewage treatment plants in Bishop Sutton. And that included the problems that arise when you come to sell your properties. Now, Bishop Sutton has a mature number of residents, and they suddenly thought, do I want to lumber my executors with upgrading my sewage treatment plant? And you could see the cogs whirring. And as a result of that, we're looking at bulk buying schemes. Another emerging problem is shared systems, where you've got a system that serves multiple properties. And of course, those property owners have to agree to a sewage upgrade, and some of them don't have the means to do so. And I was also approached by a unit trust who is funding sewage treatment upgrades in order to be able to sell the nutrient credits. And they are continuing to talk to us. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Power. If you'd like to step back, I think rather than trying to answer all your questions and all of Council these questions, I think what I really want this committee to do is for the members who are on the committee to start with their priority questions. They can by all means select some of those that Councillor Lee or yourself have raised. Just to comment on a couple of points there, the idea of an annual review, it certainly resonates, but I have a hunch it will have significant resource implications. So I think that's an idea to take away and possibly think about, how that would fit into the annual work plan for officers. So if we come back to Sienna's discussion, and really I apologise, probably should have had the councillors talk first and then have you, then you might have addressed some of those points. I've just got a question to get ourselves started, and then I'll put it round the table to raise questions. You talked about taking a strategic approach. And at an abstract conceptual level, that makes a lot of sense. But I kind of want to understand what, in your mind, would good look like. What, if we were doing it and you're able to give us a tick in the box and say, yeah, Winchester, you have got a strategic approach. What would you expect to see?
Good question. I think that's partly interesting because I don't think there's many councils that are taking a strategic approach to water, both considering water resources and quality, as well as it would probably have to take into account things like, the natural, restoring natural function and erosion and recreational pressure. And there's a whole suite of issues facing our rivers that, whilst pollution may be one of the most pressing, isn't the sole one. So I think it would have to be wide ranging and probably focus a lot on using some of the kind of information we have around natural assets and risk registers and things like that, and looking at where a strategic approach of where the kind of natural assets of the river, where need prioritising for restoration or where need prioritising for pollution reduction, etc. And then basing some of the recommendations following on from that based on kind of that work. I think also probably having really clear targets is a key thing, and often we see missing from particularly biodiversity strategies is the really clear links to how is this council meeting certain requirements for biodiversity. It might be national commitments to 30 by 30, but for water, it might be, you know, helping to facilitate getting the River Rich and Triple SI into overall good, favourable condition. Yeah, I think it's hard to say, and I will have a look for examples actually, because I think there is a couple, but none locally, and see if I can get you a better answer to that following as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sienna, and I can appreciate the complexity of doing that really well. You know, having a strategy and then actually executing on it. You know, it's all well and good having the right words, but actually, can you actually execute on it? And I think an example from somewhere else that you would hold up as being the gold standard, if you like, to requote your phrase about the itching as a chalk stream. I think that would be helpful. Then we could better understand what it is that excellence really looks like. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the floor to members. If you'd like to indicate if you'd like to ask a question, I've got Councillor Warwick, Councillor Morris, Councillor Wise. So we'll start with Councillor Warwick.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was so interesting. I've got a couple of questions which you may or may not know the answer to. I suspect when we're talking strategy, we're talking partnership, because I guess no one authority or organisation can control the whole rivers, but obviously you're a key part of that. I've got two questions. One is, are you involved in the Solent kelp bed regeneration? So I know that's slightly beyond the scope of this council, but actually that was a very important project. I just wondered if you had any update on that. And the other was something that's kind of interesting to me, is contamination of our water. And I don't know how, to what extent, and who monitors that. Whether you have an overview of the amount of contamination from nitrates from agricultural use, for example. And the other one that I always wonder about, and I don't know about, is the sort of estrogen content of water that's coming from our sewage overflows, and to what extent that's influencing the wildlife in our rivers. So those are my two questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor White. I didn't quite hear the first part, but I think the gist of it was that you're looking to understand the impact of the various types of sources of pollution to get a sense of which is the most damaging, if you like, in our rivers.
And who's monitoring those? And it may be a Southern Water issue. I don't know, but I'd just like to hear your views. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could, Sienna.
Great. Yeah. In terms of who's monitoring, you know, nitrates or estrogen, in terms of things like estrogen or even other chemicals like the kind of PFAS, or even drugs, medicinal drugs, and recreational drugs, a lot of those aren't being monitored, and the Environment Agency is beginning to look at monitoring some of those. Nitrates, the Environment Agency monitors, but also we, along with quite a few other organisations locally, will monitor it as part of our kind of river fly monitoring, or smart rivers monitoring, depends on the programme. So I guess some of the issue is, though, we have it for quite specific locations. So Environment Agency might monitor where there's specific issues, but they will also monitor kind of other sites more regularly. Our programme focuses a lot on the headwaters, less so on kind of further down the catchments. But there is a new interesting project with Friends of the Itchen Navigation and the Itchen Navigation Preservation Trust, where they're looking at setting up the first catchment-wide monitoring, including nitrates and phosphates and ammonia, temperature, and there was something else, where they'll be doing 30 sites, which are monthly tested. And that only started last month. So it'll be exciting to see what that comes up with, because really testing is quite piecemeal at the moment. Electroconductivity is the other measure they'll be measuring. Thank you. There was another part of the question.
I was just about the kelp beds, and I just wondered if I think you may have been involved in that project, or not you personally, but your trust. I just wondered if you had an update on that. But don't worry if you
I don't specifically have an update on that, but we do a lot of work in Solent. We've got a new partnership project, which is really exciting, with Blue Marine and lots of other partners. We're leading on a lot of the community engagement for that, and a lot of our seagrass work, as well as supporting kind of oyster restoration and other things. I don't know how much of an update I can give because but if you're interested, I can put you in touch with the right person in our team to kind of give you a full update on what's happening.
Thank you, Sienna. Councillor Morris, I think.
Thanks for your talk and stuff. I think you mentioned there's like 5% of sites are in some sort of state of ecological decline. Is there information available of a list of those sites, a map of those sites, the nature of the decline, and the likely causes? Because even if we can't directly do anything about them, the fact of making that information public might embarrass those causing those problems into some sort of address.
I guess, yeah, I'd sort of perhaps generalise that a little bit and say, does Hampshire Island White Trust publish a sort of set of sites which actually could need improvement, or some that are really, really good, so that folks can actually see where's good and where's not so good?
Yeah, we don't publish that, but I guess the Natural England is who's monitoring the condition of the SSSIs. And rightly, somebody pointed out they haven't been assessed since 2013-14, I think, or maybe it was earlier. But they are due assessment, but have also been due assessment for a few years now. You can go into Magic Maps on the DEFRA website and look at specific. So these are the SSSI units where 5% unrecoverable, unfavourable condition declining. And sometimes they have reasons, sometimes they don't. You can also then on the Environment Agency website look at for each water body, and then that breaks it down into specific sections of the river, what's called the reasons for not achieving good ecological status, where if it's not achieving good ecological status, they will state generally a reason, but it's often quite broad. So it might just say agriculture, you might not then know whether that's because of erosion on the bank or inputs into the river. Yeah, so we don't hold a record of, you know, sites that need improving beyond our existing reserves, but our reserves, I would say, are generally in very good condition. However, water quality is consistently something that is undermining our efforts to put nature back into recovery. So on sites, for example, where we have white-clawed crayfish, we do see that water quality, we think it's probably a limiting factor. We, you know, might have them in more sites, or they might be, you know, more abundant if water quality wasn't an issue there. And particularly this is an issue further down in the test particularly, but I think definitely would still be an issue in the Itchen as well, and Meon.
Thank you, Sienna. Councillor Wise.
Thank you. You mentioned risk registers. This might be something you've already gone through, but it would be useful to hear again and think, what do you think the biggest threats to our rivers actually are?
Biggest immediate threats, I think, in terms of likely to happen and can have the biggest impact. I think this isn't water quality, but I think as abstraction, particularly in the headwaters, as someone pointed out. And there's not a lot of indicators, but the salmon are a key indicator, and we've seen catastrophic declines because of abstraction. And it only takes, you know, these salmon are locally, they're distinct, they are genetically distinct to any other salmon in the world, and they're only found in chalk streams. Once they're gone, they're gone. So it's threats like abstraction that and kind of droughts where there's them combined, you know, there might only be a few years left of these salmon, and then that's it. Whereas water quality is also exacerbated by low flows caused by drought or abstraction, because you essentially you're making a much more not condensed, that's the wrong word, but there's a lot less water and there's more higher ratios of kind of contaminants to water. So you then see a lot more kind of the effects of water quality issues as well during that time. So I think you can't just take one of these individually. You've got to kind of look at them all as a system. But actually, when low flows by abstraction is really exacerbating the issues of water quality, and we're seeing places dry up or have massive algal blooms where we wouldn't usually see them because of low flows.
Yeah, thank you, Sienna. So it's a combination of very high abstraction and then followed by perhaps drought conditions is concentrating the pollution into that place and making the water just such bad quality that the natural wildlife, including salmon, can't actually survive. Okay, next up I've got Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. We've been busily ticking off all my questions as we've gone through it, but I did actually have a question not dissimilar to Councillor Lee, because my ward is proud to host the head of the Itchen, and the Meon River runs through it. And I've been doing a lot of work with West Meon at the moment because the Meon has quite a terrible flood problem up at running through the village of West Meon. And one of the things that we are worried about is that if that continues to flood more and more and more, it's in danger of sort of extracting pollution from various sources like septic tanks and all that sort of thing. I'm interested to know what how you classify the Meon, because I don't know that. I knew about the Itchen and the classification there, but I'd be interested in that. And so I answer Councillor Lee's question. But I have to say, it's very difficult to engage the right people to tackle that problem. The Environment Agency sort of claim to own it because it's a main river, but to what extent they'll get their hands dirty, literally, to help you resolve problems is very difficult. And you sort of push to go and solve the problem yourself. And I wonder to what extent you guys get involved in helping flood action groups, which is what we've set up. We're in conversation with the National Flood Forum, but I wonder to what extent you guys get involved in those sort of things. And then my second question was really on you briefly mentioned nutrient neutrality credits. I'm very interested to understand better how that works, particularly for something like the length of something so important like the Itchen River or the Meon for that matter, in that compensating for pollution in the Itchen somewhere else doesn't help the Itchen. And I'm not sure how good we are at working out that problem, and I just wondered if you could comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Sounds like a pretty high, extensive set of questions. So, Sienna, if you feel that it's beyond the remit of Hampshire and Work, please do clarify. I mean, I guess you've got limited powers as a trust, so be interesting to hear the answer to that.
Unfortunately, limited powers, yes. Touch on the Meon. The Meon is in, I believe, poor overall condition, and it's gone down. It was in moderate condition, is now in poor. You don't have the kind of detailed unit level, like the percentage of kind of the units that make up the river, because it's not designated. The SSSI units are just for SSSI SAC rivers. We do know that the Meon isn't in great shape, particularly abstraction. There's also less, there's some worse examples around water quality as well, and is also generally forgotten. So because of the kind of importance and the designations afforded to the Test and Itchen, they have a lot of partnership projects in order to drive restoration and citizen science and everything else, whereas the Meon doesn't have that. The second point around Environment Agency, I can't think of examples where we've supported community groups specifically around flood, but we have supported other community groups, particularly through Watercress and Winterbournes. Should get a catchy name for things around, you know, water quality incidents or incidents with diesel pollution and other things like that. We have had roles where we've had to put, you know, pressure on Environment Agency. They are very limited in resources, and sometimes it's about, you know, finding some of those back avenues or putting pressure higher up in DEFRA as well sometimes. On nutrient neutrality, so most of the schemes that we're currently in progress delivering, we've bought the land, are for compensation for the Solent. So yes, there's kind of a wider catchment area, but it's all in the same. It's removing nutrients that would all go into the Solent and cause eutrophication. So not specifically for the Itchen, but obviously because the Itchen's SAC, it's getting the same nutrient neutrality rules, and it would need to be in the catchment. A scheme would need to be in the catchment and essentially removing inputs from farming in order to offset the inputs that will then be going in from a new planning development. In practice, what that means is we have quite a, for us, it's a rewilding programme, and we have a set of kind of conditions that we have to meet as part of the contract, so we can't till or turn over the land, not that we would particularly, although it means we need to be careful with the amount of cattle or sheep, and particularly pigs on the site. Yeah, and I think actually on that, it's really important that that's strategic, like you said, to make sure it has a really actually has a tangible benefit for wildlife locally, which is why Eastleigh decided they wanted to deliver their own rather than leave it in the hands of somebody else. And what that also means is they then have control to stack biodiversity net gain and then in the future carbon credits as well, in order to create somewhere locally that supports biodiversity and water quality and everything else. And I think that's the first of its kind locally to do that, where a council has bought the strategic mitigation site, which we would applaud and encourage other councils to do as well. But it is work. Otherwise, we are, you know, we're delivering credits. But I think the key thing is taking a strategic approach and, you know, as part of wider plans, looking at where needs restoration and not just buying any old piece of land, but making sure it's the right place.
Thank you, Sian. And Councillor Bolton, you raised a really good question there, a point there about if the nutrient neutrality work isn't in the area where the problems have been caused, you still get a problem in that area. And you've highlighted that perhaps the Meon Valley is not getting quite the same attention that the Itchen and the Test are getting. So good points. Next up on questions is my colleague, is Councillor Tippett Cooper here, and then I'm going to try and sneak a question in from myself if Councillor Cooper hasn't thought of the same question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sienna. That is really, really interesting talk. And thank you to the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, who frankly are the sort of organisation that are acting as, I suppose, a block to the river of an absolute mess that water companies and the government have left the state of our rivers in. So it's really, really great to hear from you tonight. I think a lot of residents will that are listening to this meeting will be really concerned and are really passionate about the state of our rivers, and may ask the question after listening to this discussion, what can I do? So my question to you is, and I've heard about the sort of good work of the community groups you mentioned, but specifically, if we're going to say to us, if I was going to answer a question to a resident tomorrow, what can I do? What can you do tomorrow to sign up to help out and help preserve our rivers in the district? What would you say to them?
think that's a fairly straightforward one. So I won't try and intermediate on that one. Over to you, Sienna.
Great. So part of Watercress and Winterbournes, we have chalk stream champions. Sign up to be a chalk stream champion. I'm sure. Are you a chalk stream champion? There's some nodding. So there was a question earlier about citizen science, and I'll bring that into it. But we do have a good citizen science program. We're not the only one. I would also urge you to kind of, look at particularly Wessex Rivers Trust and Test and Itchen, and now it looks like the Friends of the Itchen Navigation and lots of others. And I do think it's really important to try and bring those together. So maybe that is a role of the council to look at doing that. But we train people to do a lot of that monitoring. It's quite an intensive process. Also costs us quite a lot of money, and we thankfully get grants to do it. But that only gives us a limited amount of people that we can train. And we are starting to train the trainer, so we train people who can train other people. But we're not doing it as fast as we'd like to be able to do it, which is great, where there's so many other schemes as well. So we want as many people to sign up, but we do have limited capacity to be able to accommodate everyone. But hopefully with time, we can begin to accommodate more and more people, and there'll be support through funding and through kind of catchment-wide partnerships. Maybe if we don't have capacity, we can signpost you to the right place to do, whether that's this new monitoring program, which is monitoring 30 sites a month. I'm sure they need additional help, or other partners as well, because I think that Itchen is an exception where we really do have such a strong partnership approach, and it really is unusual. We don't have this in any of our other rivers, and I know across the kind of the country it's quite an unusual position. So make the most that you can out of the partnerships, because they really are quite special.
Thank you, Sienna. So I think the message there is we need to find ways to encourage people in the Meon Valley in particular, but also the Test Valley, to engage with Hampshire and Isle of Wight Trust and in effect volunteer to take on some of these roles. That would be really helpful. I've actually got a list of questions, and I'm not expecting to ask. I'm going to ask one now. Actually, maybe I'll get away with two, and then I'll look around the room and see if anyone else has questions. I have a hunch we could keep you here all evening, but that we might be exceeding the deal, as it were. So my first question on this is just, as an expert in this area, what would you say are the 3 or 4 worst contributors to the pollution if you try and get it back to source? And what I'm trying to get at there, if we can identify the sources, then we can pick each one and say what action has to be taken by whom to address those problems. So what would you say are the top 3 or 4?
Top 3 or 4, there is evidence on this, and I can send it following around what the contributors to decline are. One of the top ones is actually quite even between farming inputs, particularly nitrates, but that does also mean kind of physical modification of the kind of banks as well. Farming and wastewater treatment are kind of the 2 big ones in terms of reasons for rivers not achieving good ecological status.
Yep.
Water, and then after that, abstraction is there as well, but really it's those 2 are the main ones, and then there's lots of other little contributors where it's death by 1,000 cuts.
So on the wastewater treatment, do you have a sense of where the relative scale on the contributions from the mains drainage wastewater treatment versus private drainage systems? Trying to get an understanding of where the biggest contributors are there.
Yeah, I don't have it on me, but I know actually a lot of the kind of focus has been on overflows. That's quite a small proportion. I think that's like 5%. A lot of it is from treated sewage. Obviously, treated sewage still does have high levels of nitrates and other chemicals. And I know urban drainage is, I think, classed as a separate issue compared to wastewater treatment in the reasons for not achieving good. I think that classes as in something else. I can send across all of the statistics afterwards.
You said there overflow, so that's overflows from the main sort of water treatment plants, and then similarly from them the untreated sewage. I'm trying to get at where the septic tanks and that area fits into that. Is that significant, or is it just minuscule? That would be the wrong place to, in effect, focus attention.
I think it's quite small. I think it's, don't quote me on this, I think it's around 5%. So the CSOs, the combined sewage overflows, is also relatively similar. And the main kind of source is treated sewage on that. But it's definitely in the stats that I'm thinking of that I can send you with, that includes sewage, septic tanks.
And in relate, thank you, Councillor Pat. So related to that, if you had if you like the magic lamp and you could have a wish, what government legislation would you wish to have put in place, or if actually you think actually it should be councils doing this? I mean, I'm advised that as a council we don't have direct powers over the likes of Southern Water or whatever, and that the power really sits with at the national level with legislation there. So what legislation would you like to see?
That's a good question. Somebody mentioned actually a really good point that obviously it's location specific in terms of impact. So a lot of the countryside places have, you know, significant amounts of septic tank. The stats that I'm thinking of are at a national level, but you can analyse them by water body and look at specifically what the key issues are per water body. So you could do that for Itch and Test Me on and kind of generate your own findings. It's quite a lot of work because the data's quite big. My dream wish list legislation, in terms of something realistic happening soon, I think there's opportunities with the NPPF review. This isn't big dream wish, but in terms of creating better planning and protections around water. But actually, I think one of the key things is water companies aren't statutory consultees. They can't refuse planning. There's a right to connect for water and kind of an assumption that they can provide wastewater treatment. But I don't think that is necessarily fair on the water companies. I don't say that very often, considering that they're not investing in wastewater treatment at the same rate. So there needs to be some form of legislation or something that puts, I don't want something that blocks planning, but it needs to make sure that there is pre-existing infrastructure in place for both supply and treatment before planning goes ahead. Otherwise, we get to the same situation we've been for many years, where we don't have the capacity that leads to, you know, storm overflows and everything else. It's certainly a big thing to tackle, but I think it is possible. But actually, this isn't. I think it needs to be looked at a more strategic scale by central government. It needs to be regional planning, not just at a local authority level. It needs to be something across the whole of the water area that certain water company deals with.
Okay, that's interesting, because you know, by implication, what I was focusing on was what can we do nationally, and I sit in a council that is very district, and what you're saying is it would be better if it was if there was some power at a regional level that could be deployed to address that problem. So we'll have to have a think about what that might mean. I guess one last question from me, and am I seeing anyone else wanting to jump in and ask questions around the table? Okay, one last question for me is, do you have a particular ask of us as a council what you'd like us to do. I mean, it's fascinating hearing about all this, and I've learnt quite a bit from it. Is there a specific ask of us that you'd like us to take away and take on your behalf?
Yeah, I think there is definitely things you can do, and I think conversations like this is a first step. I think as you're going through your local planning process, really, and going through local plan review, really carefully thinking about how chalk streams in the water environment sit in that, and seeking out the best practice you can get for chalk streams. And there are a couple of policies out there specifically around chalk streams, making sure you look at the Cabot chalk stream restoration strategy and all of the recommendations in that. But also linked to that is higher targets for biodiversity in general, because then obviously you can then use that, whether that's biodiversity net gain, to direct it into chalk stream restoration, which would be a strategic priority in the district. So I would say that aiming for a 20% biodiversity net gain in the Winchester local plan is going to benefit chalk streams, because you're going to have more funding and more, essentially more land to play with in order to restore biodiversity.
Thank you, Sienna. I'm sensing that we need to move on to our next agenda item, but I really want to thank you for coming along tonight. I certainly have more questions that I could ask, but I think we probably don't want to be here at midnight, and you probably have got other things you want to do with your life this evening. I think you referred to a couple of reports and sources. I'm particularly interested if you could give us some pointers on the specific councils that are doing the strategy side really well. That would be helpful. And it sounds like we should have a look at what Eastleigh Borough Council are doing as another example of what good might look like. So thank you very much for coming this evening. We do have a session next, actually, I think, on ecology, which may speak, and biodiversity net gain, which might speak to some of your issues, but some of the things you've talked about. But if you've got other places to be, you're more than, well, you're welcome to stay, but you're equally welcome if you want to get your life back to disappear. So thank you, Sienna. Thank you. And while we're just doing this chamber over there, Councillor Lee, I know we hit some of your questions. I doubt we hit them all. At the end of the day, we have questions from around the table, and Councillor Power, likewise, I suspect. I think actually you've asked us to take some action, so we'll follow up on those offline. Thank you, though. Now moving on to item 7 on the agenda, and this is a paper with a title Ecological Sites, and we have Rick Smith here, who is the author of the paper, and Sue Robbins as the officers, and Councillor Lerney, I imagine you will like to. I've done it again, haven't I? I've done it again. I've gone straight into the paper without giving Councillor Power and Councillor Lee the opportunity to speak. So I think we'll do that first, and we'll see if that works slightly better, because then Councillor Lerney and the officers can respond to that. So Councillor Lee, would you like to come up to the rostrum and have your say?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. I'll gallop through this because time is obviously the essence. We're moving on through the evening. First, I'd like to thank the Small Note team for their proposals in the paper and all the hard work they continue to do on nature and for our communities. The paper is timely now that we have a combined nature and climate emergency declaration, and time is now of the essence to get our processes right, especially for inculcating biodiversity net gain and local nature recovery, including other things we've heard tonight, into our processes and thinking for mitigating climate and the nature crises. And can I suggest the need for important new thinking for the combined declarations could benefit from a change in title for the Cabinet Member for Climate Change to be retitled the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Nature. Presentation, this will make it clearer to external groups and within the Council, plus to other residents, who is the key focal point for these two existential crises. Can I ask the committee to consider this recommendation? My second suggestion is to be clear about terminology with respect to natural capital, which describes the natural assets around plants, rivers, soil, wildlife. Ecosystem services are the flow of benefits we gain from the natural capital. This, to my mind, is the starting point for any strategic structured process that we may be thinking about to guide future ownership and management of ecological sites and the wider protection and restoration of nature. Ecosystem services are defined as direct and indirect contributions to human well-being and have an impact on our survival and quality of life, which includes nature. There are 4 types of ecosystem services: provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services. The other definition that is essential to include in our new thinking is nature-based solutions. And I'm delighted to see that in the late submission of the slides tonight, that gets a mention, which wasn't in the paper. And it's also good to see this term emerging in the new local plan. However, we need to define what we mean. Nature-based solutions, I'm sure most of you will know, are actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively to provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits. They're underpinned by benefits that flow from healthy ecosystems like climate change, disaster reduction, food and water security, and health and critical economic development. So thinking about nature recovery in too narrow terms, I think will be unhelpful, especially for ecological sites generally, which refer to distinctive land with specific characteristics that differ from other land. The more comprehensive approach that we take suggests that will be more helpful for delivering multiple benefits for nature and the climate crises together. So can I ask for these definitions to become commonplace in our thinking and actions as part of the guidelines and criteria to improve nature and any strategic future thinking with respect to nature and ecological sites? And by the way, the approach will be more coherent with the South Downs National Park ecosystem mapping and thinking. Remember that, of course, 40% of the Winchester district is in the South Downs National Park and is under a different planning regime. And I'm pleased to see the option to hold management of ecological sites has been rejected. Verges and different patterns of grass cutting, I agree, are totally unacceptable, that we should not do that for our nature emergency, and in particular to go greener faster. And can I ask for the Pilot Road Verge project to be extended district-wide? Can this be done, please? The DEFRA Chief Scientific Advisor highlighted there is increasing evidence that we need to ban the unnecessary use of pesticides in our towns and cities, which is having a dire consequence on our wildlife. The situation is compounded due to the wider habitat loss and the larger quantities of pesticide used in the UK agriculture. Wildlife such as bees and hedgehogs are increasingly seeking refuge in our towns and cities. The overuse of these chemicals is destroying many of the areas where they now forage for food and is contaminating natural resources that they depend upon. So can I ask for immediate review for use of chemical pesticides, herbicides in all our land management contracts in urban Winchester in liaison with Hampshire County Council? Ignoring chemical land management in our area is wholly incompatible with the development of the local nature recovery strategy needs, our biodiversity action plans and nature emergency declaration. And as previously mentioned, I'd also like to see a registry of groups to determine if there's any part they can play in the proposed nature improvement plan that is as proposed. So can this be considered? On the subject of taking ownership or management of new or additional ecological sites, my answer would be no, unless the sites fit the protected site criteria in legislation in the aforementioned ecosystem services and nature-based solution criteria. I remain very concerned, as we've heard already, about offsetting, about a habitat tank approach for biodiversity net gain to monetize open spaces to satisfy developers' approach to development where excessive harm to nature created happens, because it's easier and cheaper to buy credits than protect nature on the development site. Methinks offsetting and greenwashing by another name. Finally, I fully support the need for a nature improvement plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. You obviously timed yourself there and have practiced that. You covered an awful lot of ground there. I've made a note of a couple of the questions, but my information buffer got overwhelmed at about 2 minutes. hopefully the members around the table have taken on board some of those points. I noted a request for the role title of the portfolio holder to reflect the nature emergency as well as climate change. I suspect Councillor Lerny will may respond to that, but I don't think this committee has the power to define the role titles. I think we need to focus on the content of the paper and trying to improve that in some ways. I think there's a pilot project you referred to that you'd like to see extended, and you made a passionate case about banning pesticides. I'm sure everyone around the table would agree, although I'm sure there are possibly management reasons why that does get used in some places. But anyway, we'll come to that in due course. And I think I'll pause and hand it over to, who am I handing it over to? Oh, thank you, Councillor Power. I'm sure you'll have plenty to say too.
Rather more briefly, Chairman. Thank you. I got quite excited at the title of this report and was very disappointed actually to find out that it was totally city-centric. It doesn't take any account of the other land in the ownership of Winchester City Council, some of which are quite significant, such as half of Bramdean Common. And some of these sites have value in terms of biodiversity, wildlife corridors, nutrient mitigation and carbon sequestration. Could a review of these sites be included in the work plan of this committee with recognition of the expense of managing them, which is considerable, but also to investigate what they contribute either in terms of environmental facilities or with the potential for supporting the aims of the council. A quick word on wildflower verges. These are very much appreciated by the majority of the population in Alresford and the Itching Valley. And I'm very grateful to the team that have successfully got the contractors doing what needs to be done at last. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Power. And I think your point about the scope around this beyond the city is simply made. I think we understand that. I suspect Rick Smith will now make a case for why his team should be doubled in size. I'm slightly joking there, but only a little bit. I think we'll hand over now to Councillor Lerny to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Cabinet member for climate emergency as named by the leader, so out of my control as well. So I will keep this brief as we do have a very comprehensive presentation from Rick Smith, but the paper and the presentation do set out what the council is doing on the land we manage, and I think that is quite important to say, and what we're doing to promote biodiversity and achieve other benefits such as carbon sequestration and the health and well-being benefits that come along with access to nature. I can accept the comment about it appearing quite city-centric. This is partly to do with the nature of the land the council owns. As most members understand, the town itself is not parished, and therefore this land does come under the management of the city council directly, whereas in most of the parishes similar areas of land are actually managed by parish councils or other organisations. But Councillor Power is correct to say that there are some other pieces of land across the district that the council does own. With changes coming along such as the new biodiversity net gain regulations coming into planning and the need to update the biodiversity action plan, I think this is a good point for us to review how we're managing our land, and we'll welcome questions and the committee's views on how we move forward, recognising that the council does have very limited resources and is undergoing major work on reviewing and making savings to our budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Lerny, and for just reminding us of the distinction about the city being unparished, because it makes a significant difference. Rick Smith, would you like to take us through your presentation? Are you handing over to Mrs. Robbins or you leading?
Yes, yeah, I'll take it from there. Thank you, Chair. So yes, it's been following on from what Councillor Lenny just introduced. I'm just going to go through a few points, looking at a few examples of the type of ecological sites that we own or manage. Just going to look at the type of management that we currently undertake and how we undertake that, and then just move on to the Environment Act, as Councillor Lenny touched on, because that has obviously a massive impact on what we are going to be doing in the future. And then finally, just finish up, just sort of mention or introduce the idea of the nature improvement plan, and how we could sort of take that forward potentially. So a bit of a quite hard to read all those the names in the list here, but we just put it into the presentation just to sort of highlight the fact that we've got a big range of different types of sites that we own or manage. And it's really useful having Sienna's talk earlier because it's touched on a lot of the different types of sites that we interact with. And it's probably a good point as well here to mention, in response to Councillor Power, actually, that this site isn't an exhaustive list of all of our sites owned or managed. It's really sort of based on the most recent areas that we've been working on, and we've had specific biodiversity or ecological projects over the last, well, since probably 2015 sort of onwards. So yeah, absolutely, there are other sites such as Bramdean. We totally take that into account, that they are important and they are also being considered overall in that way. But yeah, just to sort of note here that we have these the international or the European classifications of the SACs. So that was mentioned by Sienna earlier. Then we come down in that hierarchy to the triple SIs, the national designations. And we've also got our SINCs, which are sort of our county level designations. And then we have also sort of not designated, but certain areas we have dedications, things such as fields in trust sites, which have been dedicated as specific sites. And then we also just have ecological sites. We're still labelling them this in that broad range, which aren't dedicated at all. So I'll go on to a few examples of these. So starting at the top of the hierarchy, the SAC, so the Special Areas of Conservation, and got the example of the River Itch in Tyne. And it's quite an interesting photo to show here because probably recognise this as Water Lane. But you'll see that this is the highest level of designation, but this is very urban, a canalised stretch of the river. So potentially, you might think this isn't the most important, but as we've sort of heard earlier, it's the fact that this is a chalk river and it's how it connects through the city and with other areas, which makes it really important. Wildflowers along this section. You can just see them to the right of the border there, and massive benefits along the river, improving the banks because they're not natural at the moment, but so it's an improvement in that way. We've had great feedback overall for aesthetics, health and well-being. Overall, good feedback from residents. So to keep up the management of that sort of area. Okay, so moving on sort of down the hierarchy into the national designation of triple SIs. So here we've got just a picture of example of Winnell Moors, and this is one of the sites that the Wildlife Trust managed for us fantastically. It's a wetland site, a complicated site, which does need quite specific management, cutting, grazing, and monitoring. Water levels are obviously very important. But the other thing to point out here, you can obviously see the boardwalk. So access is key here, and having this sort of site you know, in the middle of the city is a really great resource for Winchester. Being able to just get right out into, you know, a wild site like this is fantastic, and maintaining that again does take a significant amount. You know, financially, obviously we have to pay the Wildlife Trust to manage in certain ways, and capital costs such as the boardwalk and things like that are they're high costs, and they don't last forever. So if we want those sites managed for biodiversity, and we need to provide the access, you know, that we're just making that point that there is the cost related to that. Okay, so just coming down the hierarchy onto the sort of the county level sites designations, we've got the sinks. We've got the example here in Badger Farm, White Chute Ridge. So this is a site that we took back from the parish back in, I think, 2016, and we manage this now. We use some SIL funding for some initial costs for a project, and now we graze the site to replicate sort of a natural meadow, basically, and floristically this site has been improving year on year. We monitor that ourselves with our in-house ecology team plus volunteers. And it's going well. So it's floristically we manage that, we monitor that, but also we look at different types of species there, and 4 different types of reptile we've recorded over the last few years. So yeah, it's working. It's worth the management we do on these sorts of sites. And then coming down again, we've got an example of a dedication, so a Fields in Trust, and some of you probably heard of that title. It probably historically more referred to more sort of recreation and sports grounds, that sort of thing, but it does cover biodiversity and more the natural sites. I think it's actually becoming probably a bit more popular for these sort of things as well. It's a way of protecting these sites. We've got the example there. Apologies, it's a bit of a grainy picture, but this is Topfield at Kingsworthy. And this is where we've got 35 affordable houses, and we managed to introduce this area of open space with these houses. So it was a great opportunity for an enhancement in terms of open space and biodiversity. We've got an introduction of a wildflower meadow. We've got mature woodland. We've got species which we protect here, so dormice and reptiles. So again, it's another important site that we manage, but the way we manage it, it has to be quite specific. The types of cutting and so on, and the time of year is very specific. And then finally, just in that sort of hierarchy, not no dedication, no designation, but we've got examples of sites such as road verges. This one is at Winton Close. You can just about probably make out on the right hand side a bit of some of the wildflowers in there, and there's bee orchids in particular that were on this site, identified I think by a local resident, and we've managed to sort of organise the timing of the grass cutting and then removing the grass cuttings. If we can get that right, we can promote the biodiversity on that site. So in theory, relatively simple change in management, but takes quite a bit of management with our contractors to get it right. So yeah, just coming on quickly to the actual management and maintenance. We've got the photo at the bottom of the operative just sitting on the mower. You know, that's the sort of general idea we get from our sort of grass management, and that's perfect for, you know, our recreation ground where and our sports pitches and all these sort of things where we need that. But we don't necessarily want all of our open spaces to look like that. We don't want them to look like a bowling green, although the bowling greens we do. But we do have like a big range of sites. So we've got the example on the top right there, the chap actually strimming. So obviously more labour intensive, takes longer. You know, those sort of things all have to be taken into account. But and working on slopes and so on. But so that changes the requirements from a management point of view. But you can see that there's again, you know, long grass that's been left to flower providing overall biodiversity gain and enhancements, and that I don't need to go into the detail of, but it just shows that different types of management for different types of sites. Okay, just quickly to mention the Environment Act and some of the main things coming out of that, which is sort of impacting our types of management of these sites. So biodiversity net gain, everybody's I'm sure quite aware of. We've just had secondary legislation from the government on this and how we can implement from January onwards. But it really is overall a way of, via the planning system, putting in a requirement for a site to be measurably improved from before. So and putting that improvement is measurable. You have to use a metric to show that it has improved. And number two there, local nature recovery strategies, again, have been mentioned tonight already. And we're working with the county, who are the lead authority on this. So we're working on a number of working groups with them. And overall, that's how we present our mapping, how we identify our areas that we want to include in these strategies. And those strategies then direct the gain, which is, can be delivered via biodiversity net gain. So it's really important to get those right and make sure we put forward the right the mapping and the right sites into that. And then number three is just to mention another thing that's come out of the Environment Act is the fact that we have this enhanced biodiversity duty, and we've got the council has a duty to report on that as well. So this type of work that we're doing sort of works towards that, shows what we are doing and what we plan to do to enhance that biodiversity overall. Okay, then just to finish up, then just talk briefly about the idea of a nature improvement plan, and really the sort of concept is an update or renewal of the BAP. The BAP we've been working on, and that's how we've delivered all of our current work, current enhancements and so on. But now, because we've got these changes in national policy, it's a good time to sort of introduce these changes, introducing elements of net gain and local nature recovery. It gives us a chance to set some measurable targets and target areas that we want to improve on, and then at the same time we can deliver those benefits for health and well-being, carbon, and stack all these benefits, flood alleviation and all sorts. Deliver those all in one. So it gives us that opportunity to do that. And that's it for me. So yeah, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rick. Does Councillor Lerney want to just add any further comments?
Yes, I will add a comment in particular around the grass verge pilot. We did produce a comprehensive report to this committee last October on the subject, which illustrated some of the difficulties in expanding that further. It gave a clear steer as to which verges might be suitable for this kind of approach, but it also highlighted the fact that to do this well, you do need to take the grass cuttings away afterwards. So the cost of doing that is around 4 times the amount of conventional management systems, which obviously is something where, while we're still looking for opportunities to expand that, that has to be a major consideration in taking it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Lerney. Right. Have we got any questions? Councillor Wise, first Councillor Wise, then Morris, and then Councillor Bolton.
Thank you. I was pleased to hear you say you're working with the county, because one of these sites in my ward, the land opposite Stanmore Rec, has had a compound from a gas company on it for months. And they've destroyed probably about 2/3 of it. It's been run over with vans. I understand they've not done that under authority from this council. They've done it under a kind of highways authority. But is there anything we could do to stop that? Especially, is there anything you would like us as councillors to do to get those areas recognised so that they're not kind of destroyed and all that hard work goes to waste?
Sorry, I didn't fully get the start of the question. So it's the county are on site at Stanmore Rec?
So it's the land opposite Stanmore Rec. So this is on Cromwell Road, and a gas company has had their compound there with a shipping container, trucks over it, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, thank you, councillor. Yeah, we are a bit restricted on what we can do in those cases. I think it was mentioned earlier, you know, with statutory rights and so on. What we're trying to do is, as councillor Lurney mentioned, you know, we're trying to recognise the areas at which we work on for the things like the road verges, identify the areas where we can provide the best benefits, but also that fit in with the overall strategy. So they're strategically placed to link up sites and so on, and also to take in where we can take in an overall residents' views as well. We accept that issues like the grass cutting and so on do split opinion, and we do get a lot for it, but we equally get numbers against it. So we do try and take into account all those factors when choosing those sort of sites.
So, yeah, if I've understood it, in terms of the specific that Councillor Wise raised, sounds like we have no power to prevent a statutory player, like a utility player, from, in effect, stomping all over the hard work that's been done to improve a particular area.
Essentially, I mean, you know, we communicate with them as much as we can, and where we get larger scale works and things like that, obviously we would liaise with them more as much as possible with the water board and electric companies and so on. But yeah, essentially they've got rights to come in and do and clear certain bits of our land if it needs to be and so on. But yeah, overall, where they're proposing the larger scale works, you know, we'll work with, hopefully the areas will work with them and they'll contact us beforehand.
Okay, it's useful to know that's the real world reality. Councillor Morris.
I have two questions. Am I allowed two in one go?
If you disguise it so that it looks like you've only
Well, with the supporting information, it says the policy committee has asked how we should respond in case we get opportunities to buy more land. And my understanding is even if we could afford to do so using still money, that the additional management costs would basically prohibit us taking on any more land anyway. So my first question is whether my understanding is correct there. We are in a position we can't really afford any more land. My second question is regarding the land we already have, and delighted to see that St Matthew's Field is an area of species-rich grassland. And my question is, are we making the maximum ecological use out of these sites, or is there any ways of improving them or upgrading them so that they are not just species-rich grassland, but they have some extra ecological value?
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Morris. I think you disguised that quite well.
Yeah, thank you, councillor. So on the question of actually purchasing land, it's not so much a proposal to go out and strategically buy land. I think that's not sort of a consideration of this paper itself. It's more where we have opportunities that they arise via planning. So where we have the example of Topfield, where we took on land with that. So it's where an open space provision comes with land. Should that come to the council, should we take that on? It's having the option of being able to look at that, I think, is what I think would be a great asset for us. We could assess that site, critically look at it from an overall point of view of does that fit in with all of our policies and our aims? Could it help us deliver those things, the biodiversity, the carbon, all those outcomes? And obviously, you know, we'd have to financially look at that as well and look at assess that on the management. The positive at the moment is that because we've got the things such as net gain, that there's provision for management there. You know, that the development can directly pay for certain bits of management. So we have an option of using the land that we own to offer developers for management. The point came up from Councillor Lee initially on that discouraging developers actually doing their own enhancement on site, which is a valid point. But I think it's worth pointing out that the overall I don't think we'll get into the details of biodiversity net gain because we could talk for weeks about it, to be honest. But the overall idea is that the metric provides those incentives to actually do it on site yourself. So big developers on that land, major developers should be building that into their own site. So they wouldn't be coming to us to look to sort of to mitigate on our land, to enhance our land, if that makes sense. And the other question, St Matthew's Field in particular, and whether we can look to sort of maximise those things. Again, that sort of appreciation and assessment of these land is the sort of thing that we'd like to look at more. And again, it's that balance that we've got to strike on these open spaces. You know, part of my team are ecologists, but it's landscape architects, tree officers, and we take in sustainability and all sorts. So we have to make that balance on these open spaces that we have. They've got to deliver quite a lot, and my landscape architects especially keep reminding me that they're open spaces, so they have to remain open, accessible, usable for all of our residents, whilst at the same time delivering, you know, these gains. So not that we want to, but we're not going to plant them all up with trees, and you know, essentially that would be woodland, and we couldn't freely walk or play football in them, anything like that. But it's striking that balance. But I think, you know, St Matthew's Field, we looked at the borders and, you know, increased biodiversity on the edges. But you know, there's no reason to say we couldn't look at other enhancements on those sites, and finding that balance so it doesn't prohibit other uses as well.
Thank you, Rick. That's very insightful, helpful, certainly for me in some of the areas that we're dealing with. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Learney's answered my first question, which was about whether we could get woodlands, grass verges added to the scheme, which sounds like it's a bit of a no at the moment. But two real other considerations I wanted to ask about. One was on the planning considerations. I'm a bit worried that we're going to have a situation where planning is going to be held up because we haven't got enough staff to tackle this problem. And I can see it's being contemplated, but I wonder just whether we need to get ahead of the curve on the off chance that everybody's going to be wanting ecologists all at the same time, and all of a sudden, you know, they're rarer than hen's teeth or something like that. And then the second question was really just if you could explain to me just very briefly how you interact with the South Downs National Park and how maybe the division of responsibilities is, you know, divvied up between you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I'm just trying to think how Rick could kind of create many more Ricks to take on some of the planning processes. I'll leave that thought with Rick.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a valid concern, the actual resources and holding up planning. You know, we've seen that with nitrates, so we don't want that to occur again. That's why we're looking at the potential to be able to provide certain areas with net gain. But there's quite a few steps we have to go through before we can do that, and then take mechanisms for taking payments and so on. I've actually we've got a planning agents forum this week, which I'm going to, I think it's tomorrow, in fact, to talk to agents about these issues and about biodiversity net gain in particular, and what the council require from them. You know, what they have to provide as extra now, because they don't have the choice from January onwards. It's mandatory, and with that, there is extra work for us, for our team, as well as planning. You know, there's talk of added burden funds, but there's no detail on it yet. So yeah, we're working with planning to ensure we've got the right software in place. So for the validation stage and things like this, and we're also working with my ecology sub team to make sure that, you know, we're as prepared as we can be to when they start coming in, to be able to assess them. I suppose the good thing is, from Natural England, there has been quite a few delays, as we know, but it's major sites only initially that were actually accountable. And it would be a bit further down the line from April onwards that we'll look at smaller and medium sites that would be, but actually deliver net gain. So that gives us a chance to sort of have a bit of a learning process. And these major sites, as a whole, they should be building in their net gain into their sites anyway. That should be part of their landscape planning. That's best practice anyway. So in theory, that they shouldn't be looking for off-site generally on those big sites. So that's the theory that we don't want to be saying that straight away anyway. And yeah, just coming on to your sort of second question on South Downs. So yeah, we do some as part of the team. We consult on some South Downs applications as well. So we'll comment on them for South Downs. They'll call in their own, the major ones that they want to, but otherwise, yeah, it's part of a service we provide. So we comment on those. Yeah. So that'll be in-house, and we work quite closely with them. We wrote our interim advice note, our technical advice note, in conjunction, or worked with South Downs on that one. So it ties in as much as possible. That this is interim. So before we get to January, that's what we've been saying to developers that we request in terms of biodiversity net gain. So yeah, we've got a good relationship with them, and we hope to maintain that going forward.
Can I ask one supplementary, Chair?
Sure.
Thank you. So when it moves to 1 to, is it 9 dwellings in April that will fall into scope, does that also include changes to existing dwellings?
No, overall that won't. So householders won't apply, and there's quite a few exemptions now that the secondary legislation is listed. So there's the de minimis exemption for a size restriction. So it's quite realistic on these sort of sites where you're not going to be able to deliver anything.
Thank you. I'm now going to move to Councillor Tippett Cooper. Did you have a question?
I did, but I think it's been broadly answered by Rick there. It was around the future policy section of this paper, and just noting that the secondary legislation and guidance from DEFRA was due to be published at the end of November last month. And just whether we had any understanding of what this mechanism might look like in terms of the taking of payments for land management following that publication.
To be honest, not yet. I think it's an area that we're going to have to talk to obviously our legal team quite significantly about. I was at a seminar last week. There's other local authorities that are quite far ahead on this, but there's also authorities that are very much far behind us as well. And I think we're ahead of the middle, if you like to put it that way. So councils like Plymouth, they've already set up habitat banks, so they've got separate arms that can act in that way, that they can, they're already set up, ready to go. So yeah, they're quite far ahead, so we can learn from them as well. Maybe learn from their mistakes a little bit. In their own words, they said that they're taking a long time to get it set up. But yeah, we're not there yet, but we are. Where we are is at the stage of assessing our sites, looking at what we've got and what we potentially could deliver.
Chairman, if I could come in on that point, which relates to what I was going to say earlier as well. The habitat bank concept is quite important because certainly what we're already seeing on those smaller sites, which might not yet need to deliver biodiversity net gain, but do at least need to deliver no net loss, is that they're having real difficulty with those 3 to 4 house developments in providing any meaningful on-site biodiversity mitigation. Swift boxes and hedgehog holes really don't hack it. To be fair, I would suggest that members do read our biodiversity net gain technical advice note, which I think gives a very good coverage of this. There are commercial organisations out there offering habitat banking. I've taken the opportunity to talk to some just to find out what the offer was. So that is a definite potential for achieving more gain from those smaller sites. And it would be much better if we did it where we can direct where that happens and make sure that we're happy with what's going on, rather than have commercial organisations coming in and not recognising, as we do, that what we're replacing and improving indeed needs to be similar to what we're losing. But as I say, the biodiversity net gain technical advice note is actually quite a good document to cover some of those complications.
Thank you, Councillor Looney. So Rick, I noted the table which gave an extensive list of sites, and yet I also heard that perhaps there are other sites that are not on the list here. So we've already got an extensive list, and I'm also just wonder if you could just talk a little bit about where we get new sites. And you've identified Topfield has made it onto the list, but then there's other sites. And I'm thinking very parochially within my own ward here, such as the Eversley Garden site, or what we know locally as Loveton Fields. What are the criteria for the City Council in terms of what it will take on versus what it really expects parish councils to take on, along with commuted sums? If you could help us all understand, and also what the City Council's role is then in, if you like, defining the appropriate management approach for that area, and what your role is in the future, in effect, trying to manage that and enforce it and make sure the parish councils, if you like, or local people don't go native, they keep to the standard that was originally agreed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's mentioned in the paper is that at the moment, our overall approach is for parish councils to take on open spaces, which are provided as part of a development. But I think what we're looking for as part of this paper, because of the changes that are coming in legislation and so on, is the option to be able to make an assessment of these sites and then look at it whether they would fit to deliver our aims. So we don't have that strategy in place yet, because we're sort of trying to form that at the moment. But yeah, it would be on the habitat, the type of habitat. We've got our BAP at the moment, which identifies our 4 main habitat types, and we wouldn't be changing drastically from that if we rebadge or whatever we do with the update to the nature improvement plan. So it would be how it would fit in with that strategically. We'll look at how it links in with local nature recovery strategies. So we're looking at the bigger picture here, how all these sites link up. Again, we mentioned some of the things that Sienna was talking about, the higher level hierarchy designations, the SACs and so on, that have that in place. So it's we mentioned buffering those as well. So if you've got lesser sites which are in the vicinity of those, it's identifying those, to be able to take those areas. That's the sort of area that we would look to take on, as well as, very importantly, the financial aspects of those sites. Realistically, we have to be able to make that work. We have to be able to make that work. There's a mechanism now via net gain for using development to do that, but we're not fully in control of that, because certain developers might have preferred options themselves. So I think you raised the example of Loveton Fields, Eversley Gardens, and that was a long story we don't need to get into, but it potentially would have fitted criteria from a biodiversity point of view, because we know we've got other areas of species-rich grassland that would provide that sort of stepping stone of linkage from a biodiversity point of view. We didn't look overall at the finance from that side of view of that, but they're sort of separate assessments that would have to take place. And I think it's we're sort of looking for a bit of a steer on that at the same time on, you know, those things that we can take into account, and then how we can feed that strategically into our sort of nature improvement plan.
Okay, thank you for that. And the last part of my question was related to where the city council takes the role of, if you like, defining the management approach, you know, to encourage an increase in biodiversity net gain. What powers are there to ensure that continues? And how should local people, who should local people go to if they think that actually it's not being followed?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, and a lot of this is the details coming out of net gain, which we are, you know, to discover and to find out really, but we'll update as much as we can as we have that. The agreements are going to be for 30 years, so it's long term, but there is a risk that 30 years on, I'm not going to be monitoring those sites, and so you lose that continuity. You build into the habitat management and monitoring plans certain reviews. So at year 1, 1, 5, 10, 20, 30, they would be assessed, and they would have to be delivering the benefits that were sort of agreed on as part of planning. So it's all conditioned within planning, so that it's secured in that way. And then, yeah, to sort of that link to your question about residents, they would come back to us. But this is, you know, again, that's a big resourcing question or issue here that at the moment, you know, we can't check on every single planning application, even not even talking about biodiversity net gain. We can't go out to every site to ensure that they've done what they've said they've done. We have a certain level of monitoring, but that is quite a process. So we would have reports coming back on those sites, and that'd be the responsibility of the developer. But it is a concern that has been raised as this policy comes out, you know, that maybe you would lose a little bit of momentum with that.
And I guess also the parishes themselves who take on these sites also need to be aware that not everything is a football field, and it needs to be managed accordingly. Okay, I'm just going to look around the room and see if there are any more questions from anyone.
I should mention, sorry, Chair, if you mentioned, I should have said also that the off-site, all the sites would be part of a national Natural England register as part of biodiversity net gain. So they are, you know, formally registered and you know, mapped and accountable in that way. So that sort of helps in that way.
In the absence of any other questions from anyone else, I've got two, one at a very specific level and one at a fairly high level. Picking up on the question raised by Councillor Lee in relation to the use of pesticides, could you just briefly help us understand where it is appropriate, and I'm guessing in most cases you prefer it not to be appropriate?
Yeah, generally, yeah, absolutely. We don't and we won't use pesticides where we don't have to, but we have a contract with ID Verde, so that is our land management contract, and they undertake all of these different types of management across all of our sites. So yeah, we won't be spraying sites where we don't need to. There are certain times where it's applicable if we've got invasive weeds or something like that, but the type of spraying or chemical, it's not spraying, it's chemical use, would be very limited to sort of spot treatment of certain plants. But it's very rare that we would do that, and we would try to avoid that anyway. So what we would try to do, for example, at Topfield again, in Kingsworthy, you can try and use, and what we're trying to do there is to reduce the vigor of certain growth of certain plants. You can introduce other plants, so yellow rattle, for example, and this type of plant parasitizes on the grass species and others, so that will take over that growth, and it would be a sort of wildflower species that we would prefer to have there. So that's the sort of management that we would preferably use. But like I say, the details on the actual pesticide usage and things, you know, that will come down to ID Verde. I couldn't quote them on the whole contract and where they would or wouldn't use.
Thank you.
I think it's worth saying that we do use biological controls on the football fields as well, to keep down pests, rather than use pesticides.
Thank you for sharing that. And my very last question is a high level question for you, Rick, which is, I guess this biodiversity net gain legislation that's coming through is, on one hand, kind of music to your ears in terms of like it's a power that kind of improves the biodiversity net gain. But where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of concern about the resourcing? Where 1 is completely relaxed and 10 is actually panicking about the resourcing to fulfil this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, now it's probably a 5, to be honest, because this has been a long time coming. So we have been able to plan for this to a certain degree. But realistically, we always want we could take on more resource. But at the moment, we can't actually calculate the exact amount of work that this is going to generate, because it is all based on the planning applications that come in, and then the assessment of these things. And it's split across parts of my team, but parts of planning as well, under the sort of the validation and things. So totally agree. It's definitely seen overall as a real positive. We are in a bit of unknowns for a little while, but we know that this is going to assist us, and we are going to be able to deliver benefits overall. So yeah, it's definitely seen as a positive.
Okay, thank you for that, Rick. I think, strictly speaking, in terms of the format of these policy meetings, I should create the opportunity for members to go to debate. I'm very conscious of time though, and I suspect I'm looking around, not seeing anybody willing to put up their hand. And I've got a contribution here from Councillor Tippett Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, Rick, thank you so much for this. It is evidence, I think, of how well managed and carefully thought out Council's approach is to the management of its green spaces and sites of ecological importance. And it's obviously a real priority for this committee. It's a real priority for this council, and the work you're doing gives us a lot of reassurance. And hopefully, the government and other funders give you the tools to really do what you need to do in order to enhance what's already here.
Thank you, Councillor Tippett Cooper. Anybody else wish to express a view? Okay. Likewise, I'd like to say thank you, Rick, for bringing that to us. I think to some extent we are going to have to suck it and see, to use a phrase, as to what this means. But I think it's a long-term thing, so we shouldn't necessarily expect to know exactly what we're going to do immediately on day 1. So thanks for bringing this paper to us. It's been very interesting, and I think certainly I've learned quite a bit from it. Thank you. Okay, it is currently 8:30. If members do not mind, I would suggest we take a 5-minute break before we get on to the last paper, which is, I've lost it here, the CNAT report, the renewable energy. But if we could be back here by 8:35, then we can handle that last paper. Thank you, Rick. The next item on our agenda is the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan report, Renewable Energy. Before I call Anna Wise and Sue Robbins to speak, I will remember to call in Tim Jackson, who is here in his capacity as I think a leader at WINAC, to talk to us. So if you'd like to come up to the table and share your views, and after that, to make sure I don't forget, I'll invite Councillor Wallace to come and share some perspectives.
Thank you very much, Chair. At a time of climate crisis, Winchester Action on the Climate Crisis welcomes this report, and particularly the several references to the Council's aim for a district largely self-sufficient in meeting its demand for electricity. We also welcome a growth target for increasing the quantity of renewable energy generated in the district, though this won't achieve self-sufficiency unless it's increased further. We also welcome the mention of the need for additional land allocation for more utility-scale solar energy. There's every opportunity to generate renewable energy here, equal to the total annual demand of Winchester District, even if that increases by 50%, as government forecasts suggest it will. That increase is foreseeable with the rollout of far more heat pumps in homes and electric cars on the road. At the end of 2021, solar panels in the district generated around 15% of our electricity, of which 6 solar farms contributed 5 times as much as 3,750 rooftop installations. Unless onshore wind turbines become a viable option, there'll need to be a 9-fold increase in solar panels to enable us to become self-sufficient. Utility scale solar panels are the cheapest form of energy, don't require public subsidy, but do need a favourable planning framework, including storage and grid capacity. Domestic rooftops cannot provide much more than a modest contribution, though they should be encouraged. I would draw your attention to table 2.12 in the report, which targets increasing solar capacity by 203 megawatts by 2030. That will deliver less than half of what will be required by then, nowhere near self-sufficiency. It's vital the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan is explicit on a figure for land use to accommodate utility scale solar linked to self-sufficiency. Council officers drafting the local plan will take direct reference from the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan on land required for renewables, and any lack of ambition will inevitably be reflected in the local plan, dissuading utility scale finance investors whilst equipping objectors with a useful reference point to contend that no more solar farms are actually required. I commend this paper to you and look forward to the finalised version of the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan, reflecting the vision of a district largely self-sufficient in meeting its demand for electricity, a higher target for new installed renewable energy capacity than is currently shown on table 2.12, and a clear figure of the land area required to achieve self-sufficiency to inform the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Just got a quick question for you. It was sparked off by the idea of us being self-sufficient within the district. Now, someone might disagree with me, but I don't think we have any real coast as such, although there might be a tiny bit down near the River Hamble, which could be argued to be coast. And I wonder, in terms of being 100% self-sufficient in electricity generation, should the Winchester District in effect rely on a percentage of the capacity of wind generation at sea across, in our seawaters? Because as far as I know, the seawaters are nationally recognised, but not necessarily associated to counties or districts. Just wonder what proportion would be fair without, in effect, hiding from our responsibilities.
Okay, so I think there are 2 parts to the question. The first is that this is about self-sufficiency in generating the annual requirement. Clearly, with peaks and flows, you know, if you're relying on solar panels as a predominant generator of renewable energy, then at night they're not going to work, frankly, and unless there are battery backups in the district which can store sufficient energy, which is unlikely. Then we're going to require the national grid and obviously all of the other contributory energy sources, including nuclear, offshore wind turbines, and potentially onshore wind turbines when those become viable to produce the balance. But the key issue, which I really applaud in this paper, is that notion, as it says, for a district largely self-sufficient in meeting its demand for electricity on an annualized basis. That's a really key factor. So the second part of your question, I think, was getting on to wind turbines, was it?
The offshore, given that if it's offshore, by definition, it's not in anybody's district.
Yes.
So, it's just a point of curiosity in that if every district was self-sufficient in its own way, there would be a lot of capacity offshore that wouldn't be needed.
Well, that is true. What a lovely situation to be able to get to, so that the country wasn't held hostage to all sorts of price hikes from fossil fuel sources that we're reliant on elsewhere. And currently, 40% of the electricity in this country is generated by burning fossil gas. So there's a heck of a long way to go before that situation occurs. I think you've got to look at the natural assets of different areas. And clearly in and around lots of parts of the southeast, where there's a lot of built up areas, the opportunity to put in solar farms, and indeed other parts of the country where you've got land which is high grade agricultural land, grade 1 land, you certainly wouldn't want to put solar farms on high grade agricultural land. So you each have to look to the area to see what contribution can be made. And obviously in our area, we've got a lot of grade 3B agricultural soils, which have encumbrances to their use for agriculture. We have high solar luminescence. You know, we have opportunities to provide screening such that the topography of the land hopefully can offset some of the visual impacts that undoubtedly solar farms do create.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for responding on that point. I think, if Tim, I think unless there's any other specific questions for you at this point from members, I'll ask you if you could step back and allow Councillor Wallace to come up to the table.
Right, thank you. This report does a good job of capturing the current state of renewable energy across the district and within the council. However, it also highlights an astonishing lack of real progress. Paraphrase a report, there has been no discernible change in the proportion of renewable electricity produced in the district over the past 5 years. Obviously, to address the climate emergency, this needs to change, and quickly. So the first question is, do we have enough officers to run the renewable energy programme? Every part of this programme appears to need more focus. On council housing stock, the report states that only 17 panels have been installed in the past 5 years. Most of the panels have been installed were before then and are now past their payback period, and they're now generating income for our tenants. Why haven't more been installed? On council assets, the report states that solar panels have been installed on only 4 out of 745 council properties. What work is being done on the other 741? On power purchase agreements, the 2 cases where PPAs have been used are great examples, but what progress has been made in the past 3 years on expanding this model to other users? On domestic schemes, where is the public link to the GIS tool to assist rooftop and ground solar promised in the response to the council question in September? On business, according to the 2022 UK business count, there are 1,335 businesses in Winchester. The plan to perform 15 energy audits is a small step in the right direction, but there's clearly a huge challenge to reach all the businesses. On large-scale renewable, the council appears to have a plan to develop a Winchester solar farm that, and to quote the report, aims to have a pipeline of potential sites within the district that may be suitable to be taken forward as community energy schemes or by private investors. But do we have the officers available to achieve these objectives? On a local area energy plan, this is a very important and necessary plan that needs pulled together with partners, including National Grid and Scottish and Southern Electric, to enable changes to be made to our electricity network to support the switch to renewables. But again, where are the resources coming from to support producing this document? I could go on. The conclusions of this report lay out a way forward that focuses on producing statements of intent and investigations, when what's really needed is action. I don't want to be sitting here in a year's time listening to another set of reasons why renewable energy is still at only 15% in our district. We need to be working together on practical purchase agreements or community energy projects. There are clear opportunities for the council to be more proactive. I'm not suggesting that the council does all renewable energy schemes in Winchester by itself. In some cases, it may make sense to partner with other organisations, but the council is central to what happens in our district. And unless we start having these type of discussions about the practical steps needed to move these ideas forward, nothing will change. I hope the committee will use the opportunity today to start discussions tonight, or else we risk another year of stagnation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. And if you just stay there for a minute, I've got a question for you. Firstly, just make an observation that I was very pleased that WINAC have in fact commended the report, and as an independent authority in the area, authority on the subject in the area, that is pleasing to know that we're getting an endorsement for the paper and the strategies included in it. As I'm sure everyone around the table would love to go further, there's always that challenge of balancing off cost and resources. And you talked about a lot of resources and going ahead and pulling money in. I just wondered, have you costed the incremental programme, and what services would you propose to drop to fund all these extra things that you have talked about?
Right, so my understanding was that WINAC commended the aims of the plan, and I have no problems with the aims of the plan. I have problems with the fact that it is not moving forward. I mean, we've stagnated at 15% for the last 5 years. So in terms of costing for the ideas, I think I presented one there. I mean, for installing solar panels, you can put together a business case for installing solar panels on buildings, either the council's own properties or council tenants. Now, our business plans for housing go out 30 years. We know that solar panels pay back after 5 years. So if you extend the business case, you look even over 20 years, that means there's a pot of money there that you could use for hiring more officers to do this. We don't have, I readily admit, we don't have the staff available here to do all of these plans, but that's just one example. And I think if we got together and shared some ideas, we could come up with more. So yes, you've got to have money, and there's an example of how you can get it.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. I'm sure folks around the table will have taken some of those points on board, and I'm sure Councillor Lerney in her introduction will pick up on some of those points. Councillor Lerney, would you like to introduce the paper?
Yeah, thank you. I am conscious of time, so I won't say too much. One of our key pathways to carbon neutrality in the CNAP is increasing the use of renewable energy in the district, with actions which has been mentioned include increasing large-scale photovoltaics and domestic photovoltaics, as well as renewable energy purchase and transport decarbonisation. So the paper does set out the council's current and planned work on renewable energy generation, as well as the outcome of consultation that was carried out earlier this year. I think it is important to say that this is about carbon, and there's a lot more aspects to the work the council's doing on cutting carbon than just renewable energy generation. So it is important that we balance how we use our resources to get the best out of it. So, for example, in housing, we have identified that the best way to cut carbon is the fabric first approach that's being taken, not simply to put lots of solar panels on roofs, which somewhere we've got the tables which show also how effective the payback is on various different measures we can take, and solar panels comes actually well down in the hierarchy. Personally, I do live in a household which is self-sufficient in electricity over the year, but got very little at the moment, which is of course an issue. But the £680 we got for the last quarter of our feed-in tariff obviously helped. The trouble is that we installed our solar panels nearly 15 years ago at the time of maximum tariffs. We're getting 60 pence for every kilowatt we generate, and with an extra for what we export into the grid. If you have a look at what you currently get, you only get paid for exporting to the grid, and it's about 4 pence. So although we did have to pay a lot more than you have to pay now for solar panels, there are issues around. If you look at the payback period, clearly that doesn't recognise the power that you're not paying for, but principally you get the benefit of that obviously during the summer when the panels are generating rather than in the winter. We do still want people to put solar panels on buildings, and certainly that's one of the key items around the LETI standards and the work we're putting into the local plan in terms of promoting that, in terms of the keeping houses, making houses very energy efficient, but using that renewable energy generation for that, for the inevitable electricity that will be required. We do have the Buro Happold report coming forward, and I'm sure officers might want to say a bit about that. In terms of solar panels on our own buildings, we are finding that it's best to put them on buildings where the energy can be used by whoever is inside them, but we have virtually run out of council-owned buildings, operational buildings that we can put panels on, so that we are currently looking at potentially projects on buildings which we currently lease, but that will require landlord permissions. So as so often, it sounds easy, but in practice, when you have to look at some of the complications and thinking about the payback period on a building which you might only be leasing for 10 years, as opposed to a building you own, which you can expect to go on much longer, does very much change the business sense of doing that. Similarly, it takes a long time to work with partners, as we found with the work we've done with the PPAs that we have already committed to. They do take a lot of officer time, but obviously there are benefits, and as is said in the paper, we are still looking at how we can roll that out. I don't know if officers want to add a bit to that.
Yes, thank you. I'll just add a bit, if I may, just to continue some of that sort of thought and the fact that actually we are working across a number of opportunities here. So that is with housing and domestic, it's with our own and with the private owned, it's with businesses and commercial estate that we own and that is privately owned, it's with community groups, small and large. So we are working across a range of activity to understand how this can happen so that we can learn from it and we can encourage others, we can use that learning and we can share best practice. And we set out that there are probably 4 levers that we have to hit in this area, so which is about deliver, so that's doing this ourselves and demonstrating the benefits of that, collaborating with others so that we can benefit from their expertise and their resources, influencing, so that's about behaviour change and encouraging other people to invest their own money in this activity, because that's really where the change is going to happen if we can trigger that private investment, be that from a resident or be that from a business or an institution, and then enabling. So we have grant programmes as well where we're trying to trigger activity and support small scale to large scale activity in local areas and with local communities. So I think we've tried to demonstrate here that we are working across a range of strands and trying to push forward on all of those different aspects and supporting those different interests and opportunities, as well as you know, trying to find ways that we can learn, work with partners and increase the take up of renewables. But I think this is a part of the picture as mentioned, and that reducing demand is paramount first. Otherwise, then you won't need to generate as much renewable energy. So I think that's just to give some context about the paper and what we've tried to demonstrate in our work and our areas of activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Thank you, Sue, for adding the extra colour on that. Now, I'm conscious of time, and I know that Anna may need to leave. So, Anna, if you do find you need to leave, just put a hand and we'll let you go. So, have we got any questions around the table? I've got Councillor Greenberg, Councillor Morris, and Councillor Bolton. So, if we do one over here, one there, and then Councillor Morris. Councillor Greenberg.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, but to the point, I think probably. I heard what Mr. Jackson said about looking at the table 2.12 and how it seems that the utility solar farm production kind of eclipses the production from everything else. So I just wondered if we do have any figures of how much we do need to produce from that, and what sort of land size we're looking at for that. Thanks.
I just note with regard to the report, there is some information further on solar farms in the pipeline. So in 2022, there was the Three Maids site that became operational, and we have 2 in the planning pipeline at Denmead and also Crabwall near Farley's Mount, and the Bishop's Waltham solar farm, which is 12 megawatts, was consented last year. So there is some in the pipeline coming through. Obviously, we can't, the Denmead and Crabwall ones have not yet been determined. There's also some evidence in the local plan that underpins the sort of land area, but I think it's, you know, efficiencies of panels increase, and it's not an absolutely exact science. And I think the local plan policies, which are also referenced in the report, sort of underpin the points made earlier about not using best and most versatile agricultural lands, but the you know, in line with national policies on using 3B and below.
Anyway, Kate, you were supplementary on that, Hannah? Okay, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether I've got a bunch of questions or I want to go straight into debate, but I totally get the fabric first. It's got to be the right thing to do. I guess where my concerns lie is the retrofit programme and I agree with quite a bit of what Councillor Wallace had to say, is progressing so slowly. And, you know, we're looking at dates, you know, 45 million by 31, something like that. Yet at the same time, I feel like I have concerns that these big utility scale talk of projects is a distraction from what we really need to do, which is to bring some of that direct benefit to residents of advancing at pace, I believe is the current certainly government phrase for speed, improving that insulation within everybody's home. So getting there as fast as we possibly can. And what even concerns me more is that we may have an enormous amount of retrofit still to do, and we're thinking about building this utility scale piece of kit that will also then be used to offset, which seems to me is, you know, is net zeroing net zero. And we really need to focus our efforts on direct benefit to residents at the same time as getting to net zero. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, Kelsey. Thank you.
I do agree that we need to look at the benefits of residents. I do attend the Housing Retrofit Board to make sure that we are keeping on top of that. But I think it's important to emphasise that we do have different parts of the council working on the energy projects as opposed to the retrofit. The retrofit is ramping up. However, some of the reasons why it's been going slowly comes back to the benefits to people and needing to make sure that we keep tenants on board. There are quite a lot of issues with going into tenants' houses, doing work. For example, when we put extra insulation into the lofts to bring them up to modern standards, that takes the insulation to a level where you can no longer keep things in the loft. Which for tenants who've lived in their homes for many years, even just the need to take stuff out of the loft is a limiting factor. We are offering people help with those kind of issues, but we do have to make sure that we're taking people and our tenants along with us and not just charging into homes and doing things to them. We have realised that we've got to do even more explaining. I've been talking to other authorities who've been going through similar programmes, and over again I'm hearing about the need to take your tenants along with you. Otherwise you don't get to do it. But as I say, we are accelerating progress on the retrofit. There are still issues around having enough contractors available, which again is a national issue, which at the moment, while we're doing the Fabric First approach, is quite a lot of those skills are out there, but there's still issues about the number available. But as we move forward to things like putting heat pumps in, that does require a workforce which is much better trained on those new systems than currently exists. So we do recognise that it's going slowly. It is accelerating fast. So I'm comfortable that certainly by the time we come back in the summer, then we will be talking about a significant number of homes which have had work done. So we are running a lot of horses at the same time, and I do think it's important that we do concentrate on, as you say, making sure this works for people, not just, you know, it being some notion about where we want to be in the future.
Sorry, Chair, and the offsetting and utility scale, I'd be interested
Sorry, I was going to take that. Anna, sorry, Councillor Lerny mentioned that we have Consultants Bureau Happold working with us at the moment, looking at potentials and examining all sorts of different delivery models, how it runs. So that hasn't concluded. So the work on that we're looking at certainly hasn't said that it's going to be used for offsetting. That's all still being considered and worked through about the different ways that schemes can sleeve to different suppliers or pay to the grid or provide. So there's lots of different ways it can be done, and there hasn't been a decision made on that, and we're still exploring that. I'd have to check my timetable. I couldn't confirm that now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morris, you have some questions.
Yeah, this sort of picks up on something that Councillor Wallace was saying in terms of the financial situation. I know the electricity generation is, in the supporting information, it says it's 87.9 gigawatt hours, which sounds marvellous. Do we have an idea of how much actual income that brings into the council in terms of money, and whether that income stream could be earmarked for the renewable energy plan, or whether it just has to go back into the main financial pot for the whole council?
Sorry, could you give a reference? Sorry, could you just where you're getting that figure from, just so I can pick up?
It's in the supporting information 2.3.
Thank you very much. I think we let's have a look. Sorry, looking at the exits. Thank you. Okay, this sort of generation and the figures quoted here is for the district. So this is so we don't benefit from this. These aren't our generation schemes. This is what's happening across the district. Yes, we do have obviously our own generation as well, and that's going to be a mixture of it being used to to supply our electricity, and we do have some where we have some income from that, and I think Anna can explain a little bit more about the ones where we get generation of our scheme.
Yes, we get income from two of our PPA arrangements, which is with Biffa and with Marwell. But the main benefit to the council from our arrays is avoiding drawing electricity from the grid, which particularly with prices rising has benefited the council as well. And in terms of the Sport and Leisure Centre, they also will just benefit from avoiding drawing electricity from the grid that they would have done had the panels not been on there.
Yeah, as I say, the old way feed-in tariffs worked with it. You got paid for all the energy that you generated. Now you only get paid for energy that you actually export, which makes a significant difference. Yeah, I mean it's important to say that the Sport and Leisure Park, does use all the energy that comes off of the solar panels.
Thank you, Councillor Warwick.
Yeah, just a quick question. And Kelsey, you were an early adopter, weren't you? Some years ago, we were being encouraged to participate in a grand solar scheme, which was based in Swindon. In fact, I went to visit it, and I think Joseph at the time was nervous of this scheme, and lots of councils bought into it, several London boroughs, Thurrock, I think, and that scheme failed last year, and it lost the councils £200 million. And I just wondered about the due diligence and what you would do to ensure that doesn't happen again. That was the Rock Fire scheme in Swindon. And the other thought I had as we were hearing about biodiversity and the importance of preserving our nature is whether we want to cover our fields with solar panels necessarily, and whether there's a brownfield policy that's emerging, or a large rooftop policy which would make sense on commercial buildings. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
I'll take the biodiversity one. Actually, the evidence is that putting solar panels in a field, if managed right, can improve biodiversity. We've certainly seen that in measurable cases elsewhere. I think if you go back to the Carbon Neutrality Open Forum we held, where we had a talk by a community energy organisation, you know, they were saying that they'd seen incredible increases in biodiversity in their solar farm. But I think there is a case where you have to bake that in from the beginning and make sure that you're achieving, as we heard earlier, you do need to make sure that you're achieving those biodiversity net gains. But I think overall there's actually quite a positive story to tell on that. I think also moving forward, we may well see more forms of agriculture still happening where we've got solar panels installed. It's not quite as easy as people think, talking to farmers to manage, you know, whether you're growing things or farming animals underneath them. But it definitely does have potential there for dual use of land. So due diligence, definitely hand that over to Sue.
Due diligence, yeah, vital for any investment that the council would want to make in schemes, and I think that would have to be predicated on what our strategic case is and what the intent is around the scheme as to you know, is it meeting those objectives? Is it doing what it's meant to? Is it delivering it in the best possible way to meet those strategic objectives? It would also be whether or not we enter into any partnerships, etc. I think some of those schemes you're talking about were sort of investment based, and I think we're probably not in that for our strategic case, although we want to make a return or at least be, you know, cost neutral. So I think that's where it has to be understood what your intent is with this in the first place, and is the project meeting those aims. But yes, of course, due diligence on any investment would have to be thoroughly undertaken before decisions made.
Thank you. I guess there's also comes back to that motion I think we discussed here last week in council about where the pension funds put their money in investing in those larger scale solar type of projects. I've got a question for myself, and then we've got Councillor Bolton wants to come in with a further question. So I just want to get some clarity on the amount of solar power generation that is being hosted, I'm going to say, within the district, and it may not be a figure in the paper, but Councillor Wallace was saying, well, we're at 15%, and it's still only 15% over a number of years, and that doesn't quite resonate with my understanding of what's saying with. Well, surely there must be more happening within the district. Can you just clarify the sort of rate of growth, if you like?
Table just below paragraph 9.1 is an extract from the Renewable Energy Planning Database from October 2023, and that confirms the installed capacity is 87.2 kilowatt peak. As I mentioned, there's a bit of a lag from, you know, the formerly based figures, which I believe in the WINAC report, and Tim will no doubt correct me if I'm wrong, stop in 2021, with the 3 Mays being constructed in 2022. And then that also table covers the pipeline at the moment. So there's a further 55 megawatt peak, sorry, that's been consented but not yet constructed. And then there's a further 20 megawatt peak, which is the Grabble one that's undergoing planning. But I think planning is still not easy for sites, and developers, it can take a long time for the sites to gain planning. So even with a pipeline of planning applications, I don't think it's going to move. You know, it's a slow moving thing to bring a solar farm into operations, but I think there's been steady interest. So, yeah.
I think it's also worth adding that our planning policy and national planning policy are not the only constraints here, because there is this significant issue around grid connections. I mean, and also the paper refers to zombie capacity, which essentially is where people have booked up grid capacity in the anticipation of perhaps some point in the future putting an application in, but those applications don't necessarily come forward, so that capacity is being tied up unnecessarily. So we do have to look at how we deal with more constraints than just the planning system. And of course, it is very reliant on the private sector being able to bring projects forward.
Okay, so I think if I've understood you correctly, Anna, there has been growth in terms of the capacity over a period of time, and there's a pipeline of projects that could come on stream, but there are complications for the private companies that are trying to bring those forward. Is that the kind of net summary?
Yeah, so the table below paragraph 9.1 shows the ones that are consented, but they haven't been constructed. We don't know the reason why that is. It could be a grid issue or a financing issue, but there are a number that have been consented, but not yet brought into operation by the developer.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned at the start of the meeting that made me think about wind generation, and it made me sort of wonder whether enough of a risk-based approach is being taken to renewable energy generation, in that, you know, in-baked climate change that we're going to have to deal with anyway could lead this country to be even cloudier and wetter than we ever imagined. Or in fact, an unpronounceable volcano might go off in Iceland and it becomes very dark for a while. If it's all PV, we've got a bit of a problem. What can we do about that?
I absolutely agree, Councillor Bolton. Changing the government might be a good start to that, because given that I think there were 2 wind turbines built on land in England last year, I think we really do need a different approach to the planning system. I absolutely agree with you, though, about the issues around PV, particularly for us as a district. While we're not the windiest of places, there still is plenty of potential for wind generation in this part of Hampshire, and I think it should be part of our future energy mix.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Learning.
Touche, isn't it?
Just say never want to miss an opportunity. I was just going to offer you, Councillor Bolton, the opportunity to come back on that, but you've done so very well. Yeah. Okay, any further questions? Right. Do we feel we need to debate this subject, or have we expressed our views in the form of questions? Anyone up for debate? Okay, I'm seeing shakes of heads on the left side of the room, over there, right side of the room, and I know that Anna Wise is a daughter who needs to be picked up, or a son, I can't remember, sorry, is it? Someone needs to be picked up and looked after, so I'd like to give you the opportunity to leave fairly shortly. So I think we close that particular section of our agenda. So Anna, Sue, you're more than welcome to stay. We've just got the last piece, which is to note the work programme. Mrs. Adey, have you got it in front of you, or would you like to just remind us of what we've got coming up?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned at the opening of the meeting there are 2 special committees to be convened in January. One for us to discuss the waste programme, and the second one, I'm looking at you for help, to discuss the health consultation for the hospitals. You then have a standard agenda, 28th of February, for Homes for the Ukraine Community Integration Programme and the Air Quality Management Area and Air Quality Strategy Annual Update.
Thank you, Mrs. Zadie. So I think we're all set. I think we'll call this meeting to a close. Thank you, members, for asking insightful and interesting questions. And thank you, Sue. I think Anna's already disappeared for that last session. Thank you, Tim Jackson from WINAC, for coming along and commending our paper, especially for commending our paper. And Councillor Wallace and Councillor Lee for your interjections or your comments at each